Sometimes older people start to rely on people they've never met before.
They may become affectionate towards friends, family, neighbours that they were never fond of before.
People becoming more anxious, isolated, and they become more vulnerable to advantage being taken of them, and in some cases more extreme predatory behaviour.
I'm Caroline Abrahams and I'm the Charity Director at Age UK. I'm a lobbyist and a campaigner and a media spokesperson. The care industry is under enormous pressure and there's not very much checking of who gets to get a job. Some of the agencies are just so desperate to get people. The standards and the thresholds are lower than they used to be.
I've had a relative fall prey to a carer. She was 96 and she was living on her own in South Africa, and the carer came along, befriended her, started trying to isolate her from the few people that she did still know, her friends, her relatives. And then, once she had died, it was discovered that a new will had been made, giving everything to the carer.
These kind of manipulative behaviours that we're talking about can actually be quite subtle, and suddenly that person becomes really entwined in that person's life. It should be a red flag when that person starts making financial decisions on their behalf. One example is where that person suddenly appears as a named account holder on a bank account.
Fraudsters actually look for people with dementia, so whether that's online or doorstep or even romance fraud, which is extraordinary. They're looking for love one last time in their lives and are approached by somebody who seems to be in it for all the right reasons, who wants to make friends with them, perhaps a bit more than that. Often these are quite vulnerable people who are perhaps very lonely. And then before you know it, money's starting to go out of their accounts, whether that's putting their hand in their purse and just routinely taking money out of it, or something rather more organised and sinister.
There's another case that came to mind involving a lady in her 80s who became the subject of predatory behaviour by a man who was 40 years younger than her. In her state of infatuation was paying this man's children's school fees.
Maybe my relative did really want to benefit her carer to the extent of her entire estate. Whether she'd have made that decision 10 years earlier, had she not been so physically vulnerable, is another question that we would never know the answer to.
On the one hand, we want older people to have the autonomy and the control over their affairs for as long as possible. But on the other hand, we have to be conscious that sometimes that gets to the point where they're taken advantage of. It's not just bad for their finances, it can actually destroy their well-being, their confidence. There's always a risk that the law is slow to catch up with changes in behaviour, finances, societal expectations. And what we have certainly seen at Age UK is that it often hasn't been a high priority for governments to bring forward legislation in these spaces, which really hasn't helped older people. The whole issue of inheritance and families quite often brings out the worst in us as human beings because there's too much at stake.